Viscosity is defined as the state of being thick, sticky, and semi-fluid in consistency due to internal friction. For something to be viscous, it has to be fluid in some form. For things that behave like a liquid and a solid at the same time, though, the term viscoelasticity was coined in 1835. Now, I don't think they taught me that one in school because it took me 3 months to understand what Kuro Games was doing with Yinlin. Yinlin is the new Electro unit, and 99% of the player base is gonna be pulling on her. The other 1% saw Chengli leaks. If you want to play a badass red-haired character in Wuthering Waves, then I don't actually have a guide on her yet. If you want to be dominated, then watch this video. I will not be dominating you, this is just a Yinlin guide. My name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Yinlin. If I had $1 for every made-up turn I had to memorize for this video, I'd have $1, because I spent the rest of it pulling for Yinlin. There's honestly not too much you could do to persuade me not to, because if being hot was a crime, then Yinlin would be headed straight to Alcatraz. Her basic attack is called Zap Strings Dance, and I've never wanted to be a puppet so bad. It's a 4-hit combo and generates Forte. Her skill, however, puts her in execution mode. The execution in question? My f***ing eyes. Yinlin's Forte circuit has an interesting effect called Sinner's Mark. Sinner's Mark just means that an enemy has been hit by Yinlin in some capacity outside of her skill, and disappears whenever she leaves the field. If getting hit by Yinlin is a sin, then I'll gladly become a sinner. When you use her resonance skill, it does some damage, and all Sinner's Marked enemies will take a bonus hit of electro damage from your basic attacks and dodge counters for up to 4 hits, meaning you can dish out a ton of damage in a quick little burst. She can activate her resonance skill again though, and dish out a high scaling hit. Usually that means you'll want to mark enemies, skill once, do 1 full basic attack combo, and then skill again. Yinlin is a huge addition to the self-insert meta of gacha games. When she uses her Forte circuit, she leaves just enough room for you to become her chair. When activating her Forte circuit, she gives everyone with a Sinner's Mark a punishment mark instead, and it should have been me, not him. The punishment mark is a harder hitting version of the execution mode that lasts for 18 seconds instead of having a specific hit quota, and it doesn't disappear when Yinlin is off field, meaning that the extra damage effect can be procced by any character. It may only be triggerable once a second, but it's a pretty solid amount of extra damage that Yinlin is still doing to the enemy and their mental health. By the way, you can basically ignore the term judgment throughout her entire kit, because it just refers to the amount of points needed to give Yinlin a human footstool. Yinlin has 2 huge reasons to play her, and the third reason is that she's got a solid outro skill buff for your next character, both an electro damage amplify and a resonance liberation amplify, which if you didn't know, it's just the deepen effect. They changed the name of it and didn't tell us. She also has 2 passives that slightly buff her as well, one giving her 15 crit rate after using her skill for 5 seconds, and it doesn't actually activate on the second half of her skill, so that's worth keeping in mind. Yinlin's second passive gives her second hit of her skill a damage bonus against Sinner's Marked enemies, and gives Yinlin an attack buff for 4 seconds after that effect is triggered. Her intro skill does damage and gives her some Forte gauge, and lastly, her ultimate just does a lot of damage and gives R34 a buff to inspiration. Because of how Yinlin's damage is spread out throughout her kit, you want to prioritize leveling her skill, then resonance liberation, then normal and heavy attacks, and lastly, her intro skill. One of my favorite things about Yinlin is that she can be played in quick swap or standard rotational teams, which means that she's a flexible and fun character that's versatile when it comes to pressing the 4 buttons that this game has. I'll get into the rotational things in the team section, but for now, let me show you the best echoes to pair with Yinlin. The hardest part when playing Yinlin is scrolling through the menus over to echoes in the first place, because in every single menu she has some sort of attitude, or as my chronically online friend would say, she's girl bossing. The second hardest part, when you're building Yinlin, it's pretty straightforward. You want to aim for the full Void Thunder set for electro damage with a 4-3-3-1-1 setup for endgame, and if you really have to, a 4-4-1-1-1 setup early game. But please guys, let's not make this a thing I have to include in every video, it's actually so ass. Your 4-cost echo can be either Tempest Memphis or Thundering Memphis, but Tempest Memphis is actually faster than Thundering Memphis, so it's basically always going to be better for her. You can also technically build the attack percent set with Mech Abomination, but I wouldn't recommend it because it ends up being less damage overall in a majority of cases. For the other echoes, you'll want 2 electro damage 3 costs and 2 attack percent 1 costs. As for substats, because a majority of Yinlin's damage comes from tying people up with electric ropes, skill damage is one of the best ones you can get that isn't crit, but you'll want to prioritize crit stats, attack percent, skill damage, and liberation damage sort of in that order. Energy regen is a myth, and I want you to erase it from your mind, but if you hit it like once or twice, it's fine. Here's a build summary just to put everything all together. The most disappointing thing about Yinlin has to be her weapons. I don't know why we have to level up something else when she already has 2 of them. Yinlin has a couple different playstyles depending on the teams you run. For example, there's a 30-ish second rotation one, and then there's the fun one. With so few weapons in the game, Yinlin's best option is her signature String Master, regardless of rank, due to its crit rate main stat, damage bonus, and attack buffs. It also gives an off-field attack buff that makes Yinlin's passive skill damage able to hit even harder. Cosmic Ripples is another solid option, being the only other 5-star at the moment, and thus having high base attack and some solid general buffs. Now, if you swiped on the battle pass, Augment is going to be your 3rd best choice for Yinlin with its crit rate main stat and attack buffs after Resonance Liberation. But if you don't have any of those, Jinzhou Keeper is going to be your next best choice for the attack bonus on intro skill. And if absolutely none of these are available, you can always run a rank 5 Rectifier of Night, since it's a 3-star and it should be pretty easy to get high rank on. Here are 2 charts showing damage comparisons between quick swap weapons and long rotations. Comparing quick swap to long field time rotations is like comparing apples to oranges. They're both fruits, and one feels better in your hands. This is the root cause of my mental illness. So Yinlin is basically very swappable. There are like 5 characters in the entirety of Wuthering Waves at the moment, and Yinlin kind of works with just all of them. It's not like she has insane synergy with everyone. She's just such a flexible character that does so much damage towards the start of this game when there's not a lot of synergies in the game that she just fits. So let me show you what we've been cooking. Basically, Yinlin is a character that can be played on field for a long time or in quick swap, and truthfully, for high skill gamers, quick swap's probably the way to go. And for more casual gamers, you're probably going to want to play her on field because she's hot. So while the most obvious synergy is going to be Kalcharo, who's going to be a main DPS, there are some other options, but let me just go over the Kalcharo synergy first. Basically, the reason this is strong is because Kalcharo was sort of the premier Electro DPS, and Yinlin is sort of a premier Electro support sub DPS that also just does a lot of damage. Yinlin does so much damage as a sub DPS, you should probably call her a Dom DPS. When paired with Arena, Yinlin's basically going to give Electro damage deepen, Resonance Liberation deepen, and then Various going to give damage deepen, and then she's also, I guess it's not even called deepen anymore. They like change it to amplified. Yeah, it literally, it makes more sense, but I'm gonna have to get used to that. But you can play these 2 characters by taking up a ton of field time with Yinlin and swapping to Kalcharo. But if you want to be super optimal, there's a lot of swaps that go into it. And truth be told, I don't even know how to play Kalcharo Yinlin optimally because it takes a fucking nuclear physicist to be able to understand how this rotation actually works. Or Grimro Gacha in 3 days from now. Now, a team that doesn't have insane synergy but just works because, like I said, there's 5 characters in this game, is this combination of Jansen, Yinlin, and Encore, where Encore is a very quick swappable DPS. Yinlin is able to do that as well. You can basically swap out during most of her animations, and she will finish the animations and the attack, and it just saves you a ton of time. And Venti at home helps you group enemies. One of the other synergies I did want to talk about was Taochi. Now, not a lot of people are actually playing her because, truth be told, she kind of sucks right now, but she does technically have synergy. She does increase resonance skill damage by 38% for 14 seconds or until they're switched off field. So if you plan on playing Yinlin on field, a majority of damage from Yinlin comes from her skill. So adding a 1.38 times multiplier to that will be pretty massive to her personal damage. And if you played for Arena Taochi Yinlin or Baiji Taochi Yinlin for free-to-play players, you're gonna have a lot of amplification on Yinlin's damage, and she already trucks, so she's chilling. Realistically, I anticipate in the future we will have a character that feels like they fit perfectly with Yinlin, but as of right now, she can kind of just play with anyone because her damage is just really good in general. On or off field, she swaps out really quick. She effectively has AoE damage through hitting multiple targets at the same time. And yeah, overall, very solid unit that can be used in a ton of different teams. So there are going to be strict rotations that you can follow with Yinlin to really optimize your DPS, but there's honestly so many different ways you can do it depending on the amount of enemies, if it's a boss like single target, or what teammates you have, what your energy regen is. So there's a lot of different factors that can go into it. So instead of showing you a strict rotation, I'm going to show you what's actually swappable. I mean, honestly, it's basically everything in the kit, but some examples of things that you can do are you can double skill on Yinlin. So you can just go skill, skill, and as she's finishing that kick, you can swap on over. Same thing applies with Thundering and Tempest Mephis. Now, I have better stats on my Thundering, so I'm actually using that. On the last hit, you can swap off. It'll save you an extra little bit of time. We can do like Encore, on-field shenanigans. We can just try to fill up that Forte gauge. Now we can swap off Encore while charging that. We can double skill again if we wanted to. Go right back to, not Baiji, Genshin. And though you can't swap during her ult, what you can do is you can ult, hold left click, and then she'll sit right down after this. and you can just immediately swap. So that way you can save yourself all of that time and still get the sub DPS from Yinlin. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways you can sort of swap her out. You can also do the on-field 4 swipes and then swap as well, and that's another efficient way to do it depending on the team that you're running. I have a level 20 Jensen, so obviously she's going to be dead, but you can swap her in and out very often for a lot of off-field damage. Now you can also play her longer time on field as well, and this is what I'm going to go ahead and show you. We're going to go and swap to her. And now we're gonna go ahead and use her skill, hit some things a few times until we're out of attacks. Then we use her follow-up skill. Then we can use her ultimate straight into her Forte circuit. And she's gonna sit right down, swap to Calcharo. And if you have a fully invested Calcharo and you're playing Yinlin and you want to use the longer field rotations, this is basically like an example of one of the things that you could do. You can always swap right back to Yinlin, or you can swap back to Farina. But as you can see, they're just taking a ton of damage from her Forte circuit, which is going to be really nice and really helpful. If your Farina has more energy regen than mine, you'll be able to use her ultimate and then go straight into another outro, back into Yinlin. Now we can just do that first skill. And we're going to tag everyone with a Sinner's Mark. It's going to be taking more damage. We can do that to finish it out, and then we can die. Ultimately, there is so much flexibility with this unit, and she is so complex that I'm almost tempted to make a second video that just goes over her specific rotations. But just know this is one of those units where you can really experiment and you can really flex with them, so it's super fun to play her. I do have to apologize because I did not give you guys a strict rotation to follow for this one, but a lot of that is due to just how flexible this character is and how much things can change during combat. If you guys want to see some examples of different teams with perfect rotations as we discover them and really optimize, let me know down in the comments, because it really helps me gauge how many people would actually be interested in that sort of thing. And for now, let's talk about sequence nodes. In case you haven't seen the Chun-Li leaks, or you're just really horrendously down bad for elf ears, here's what her sequence nodes do. Her S1 gives both parts of her skill a pretty big increase in damage, and S2 gives extra energy and Forte gauge when you proc her Sinner's Mark skill hits, which helps play into her quick swap playstyle, but not a ton into her longer rotations. Basically, it's a rotation shortener. Her third sequence node, though, is actually kind of crazy since it increases the actual damage multiplier of her Forte circuit's attacks on punishment marked enemies. It's one of the highest damage adding sequence nodes by far, and S4 plays into that even more by increasing your whole party's attack for 12 seconds when a judgment strike hits, which can basically mean that you have almost permanent attack percent buff on your next character. S5 is going to be a massive increase in damage to her Resonance Liberation because it does extra to marked enemies, making S5 one of her strongest sequence nodes. And S6 basically gives Yinlin a ridiculous extra damage mechanic that's based on her skill after she uses her ult. It counts as skill damage, and the multiplier is insane, basically making Yinlin fully capable of hoarding all of the field time, but just generally increasing her damage output. Now, the clear winners of this are going to be S3, S5, and S6, but that is incredibly expensive. I don't know why anyone would spend money on this game, but if you spend on Yinlin, at least I know your student loans are going to the right place. Definitely go for her weapon over sequence nodes if you can, since it's one of the few actually good rectifier weapons. But remember, gambling is bad, and she's not going to sleep with you.